Greetings of the day and namaskar. We welcome you all to the second session of the Mega International Lecture Series, which is envisioned as a curtain raiser to our annual international conference, which is Global Leadership Research Conference 2022. There will be series of international lectures of academic stalwarts who will share their immeasurable knowledge and acumen which will enlighten all present. Today's distinguished lecture is by a stalwart from Case Writing Universe, Mr. Richard McCracken. Now, I would like to invite our Honorable Dean of Faculty of Management Studies, Director and Head of Amity Business School, Professor Dr. Sanjeev Bansal sir, to welcome our esteemed guest, Mr. Richard McCracken, Head and Director of University of Winchester with a sapling.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Proceeding further, I request Dr. Anupma Rajesh, the Head of Internationalization Cell and Professor at Amity Business School, to introduce Mr. Richard.
It's my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce and inform the gathering about Mr. Richard McCracken. And if our Dean, sir, and Richard allows me, I'd like to call him Professor Richard McCracken because he's an honorary professor with the Amity Business School, has been the director of the Case Center since March 2008. He oversees the Case Center's global operations from its UK office. Richard regularly represents the case community at conferences, workshops, and competitions as both as a speaker and a moderator. Richard is also on the judging panels for the Case Center's annual Case Method Awards and competitions and EFMD's case writing competitions. Richard is editor-in-chief of the Case Center's journal, Case Focus, the Journal of Business and Management Teaching Cases, Middle East and Africa edition. A keen writer, Richard blogs about the world of case-based management education. Prior to joining the Case Center, Richard was the head of the intellectual property at the Open University. During his time at the OU, Richard was instrumental in the development and launch of the Open Learn initiative, which makes educational resources from OU courses freely available worldwide via the internet. Richard was also a member of the senior management team responsible for negotiating and managing the university's unique relationship with BBC. Richard holds a degree in English literature from the University of Sheffield and law from the Open University. He's also a postgraduate diploma in intellectual property law for the University of London. Welcome, Professor Richard. Over to you.
Dear Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Bansal, thank you so much for that warm welcome. Organisers and conveners of the conference, I give you my congratulations on such a successful Renvoy. Participants, it's nice to meet you and to be able to speak to you today, faculty and especially students. It's an honour to address you on the topic of the case method in the round, from writing to the classroom and beyond. The case method, as we know well, is based on impact on student development and the quality of student experience in the classroom. But there is much more to the case method than that, and the approach I'm going to take today is to explore, in particular, the impact of teaching cases, and to share some current trends, and to look at the impact of the case method outside of the classroom. It really is an approach to education from throughout all of its progress, from research and writing the case to teaching it in the classroom, and then to distribution and reuse of the case in other contexts, in other business schools and in industry itself, that brings real impact and reward to the case author and to their school. And I think it's really worthwhile exploring that. I shall also look at highlighting some characteristics of case competition winning cases, what they share in common, and in award-winning cases, what they share in common with other best-selling lists as well. And to share some thoughts on current trends that I can see are beginning to emerge in case writing around the world, particularly in response to the impact that COVID has had on business schools, as we have all moved from face-to-face teaching to online and hybrid. So if I could have the next slide, please. I want to begin by looking at the components of the case method. The first is that the case is built around a business decision taken from real life. So this is a decision that real business people have had to struggle with and engage with in developing their company and addressing the issues that are current to them at the time. It links academia into the heart of real business making and grounds academic theory and academic experience and teaching of students within the realities of everyday business life. And I think that's a real strength. It really depends on that. What is built around the business decision in the first instance is the teaching case. And that requires that the academic author of the case engages with those people or with desk research around that decision and writes it in a way that converts that into a structured teaching case, which is designed to stimulate discussion in the classroom. It brings, in effect, business decision making and the realities of business life into the classroom for students to grapple with as firsthand in responding through the discussion. The next element that's very important and which I'll look at later in my presentation is the teaching note. This is a kind of commentary that's written by the author of the case in which they share their experience of teaching the case themselves and also their intent behind what was their intention in writing the case, and also brings in other supplementary material and references that places the case in the context of theory and of textbooks and may also disclose what actually happened in the case. And that shares the experience between the author and teaching peers who adopt the case for teaching in their own classrooms. This is a very important document that is restricted to teachers only, because it gives them an insight into the case that helps them facilitate the discussion that students have in the classroom, but without sharing the end result, because it's very important that the class discussion, which I move on to next, that class discussion takes place in an atmosphere in which the process is more important than reaching a right answer. That's where the real value of the class discussion lies, and it's at the heart of the case method. The approaches to teaching and approaches to writing the case are extremely important, but they are the structures within which the class discussion takes place. It's the class discussion which is the most important part of the case method. And that's because the case method teaches by asking questions rather than giving answers, and by dealing with issues that are deliberately ambiguous and uncertain. If you disclose in the case the result of the business decision and say what the company and the participants did in responding to the scenario, then you close down the discussion by removing ambiguity and uncertainty. The ambiguity and uncertainty is an essential part of an effective class discussion. And today's students will be entering a workplace where, more than ever perhaps, the ability to handle uncertainty and ambiguity is paramount and becomes a real skill that employers around the world are looking for. Can I have the next slide, please? So if we're going to be looking at the case method in the round, it's important, I think, to understand the context in which the case method operates and the factors and influences that may impact on its development and on current trends. So the context in which someone writes a case is, let's see, starting at the most mega or the most meta level, external factors that are operating on business schools. And one of those, the greatest one recently, has been the impact of the pandemic and how schools have responded to that, and by moving online and by having students essentially working at a distance. But there are other really important external factors as well. They include government policy, for example. They include business needs in regards to what business is looking for when recruiting students from business schools. So they impact in turn on the design of the curriculum. And that also includes the strategy of the school. A school may see itself as being an international school operating internationally across borders and recruiting internationally. And it may also, or a different school may look at itself as being a school that's determined to have an impact on its local business communities and on its regional infrastructure and economic development. So depending on how the school sees itself, that will have an impact on which external factors operate on the school. And they together influence the design of the curriculum and what the school will focus on in designing what it wants to teach its students. Within both of those contexts, case writers start to look at case teaching and case writing. What kind of cases do they want to write? Which kind of cases will best deliver the strategy for curriculum design that is developed in light of those external and internal factors? And then finally, it links research, which you've been concentrating on in the last couple of days as part of Renvoy, and which is a real strength of Renvoy, with teaching and with business practice. And those things together add up to a really impactful pedagogical methodology that improves student experience and engagement and delivers skills development that students find a real benefit when they enter the workplace. And talking of students, as I know, I know that we have many students joining us today to participate. I want to say to them, think about how you participate in the process of learning in the classroom. It's a very difficult skill to participate fully as a student in the classroom discussion. You may find that you feel a bit uneasy because it's not immediately apparent that you're learning anything. You're talking about a lot of things, but I want to reassure you that the skills that you learn and develop, you absorb as part of the classroom discussion, and you absorb those best by preparing for class properly. You really need to understand the case before you come into class, and then participate fully in the discussion by being open and respectful of presenting your own opinions about the case, and respectful in listening to and responding to in discussion the opinions that your classmates also express. And by doing that, you start to develop all kinds of skills that are at a premium with employers. Employers look for people who can collaborate and work in teams, who can express their own ideas and back up those ideas with evidence, who can adjust their thinking in light of changing evidence and the changing scenario, and who are comfortable in working with people who come from different backgrounds, have different opinions, but have a shared goal. All of those are really valued by employers. And please enter into the case discussion experience openly and well prepared. Next slide, please. So having spoken a bit about the context in which the teaching case is written, I want to look at the impact cycle, which I call it, which is a kind of virtual circle of development from research through writing the case, then teaching it in the classroom, then distributing it to other schools and other contexts, and then developing it through business relationships and repeating that cycle, because each time you write a case, at the end point, there may come opportunities to do further research with the same company at a more deep level, and to repeat another case writing cycle, building on the experience of the first one. So looking at these in turn, we have the first exercise of researching a business scenario that you're interested in. You may do that in the field by speaking to the participants face to face, which is a really good way of establishing strong links between yourself and business. Or you may not be able to do that. You may do it through desk research. And that also can be a very effective way of writing a case. Then when you write the case becomes an alternative output for your research. So you may hear some people speak of either writing a case or publishing a research paper, as though the two were competing in some way. My view is that actually cases are an alternative output, not a replacement for writing a journal article or presenting a paper. So cases are now increasingly being seen as something that you can evidence as a research output. We are able to provide you with distribution statistics around how many other schools have picked up the case, where it's been taught, and what kind of impact it's had in the classroom. And some of the accreditation agencies are starting to look at that as evidence in support of an accreditation bid by schools. So cases as a research output, as well as a classroom, in having classroom impact, is definitely one of the benefits of the case method cycle. Having written your case, then the first thing that you do with it is to teach in your own classroom. And that has an immediate impact. Students really see a teacher who is teaching their own case, a case that they have researched and written themselves, as having a different kind of standing and status in the classroom, because they know and understand the case from the inside. It also is a good way of taking into the classroom your own views on something that really matters to you. And you've written the case to take account of the school strategy, your own approach to teaching your subject, and to the talents and nature of your own student cohort. So teaching in the classroom is just a huge impact, and that's the most important of all. But having taught in the classroom, then you may want to distribute the case beyond your school. And that has a widening effect on the impact, both for yourself as the writer. It takes the author's name into other classrooms and schools around the world. It may lead to awards or best-selling or competition wins. But it also takes the name of your school into classrooms around the world and can support the school in terms of accreditation and also in terms of raising its profile among the local business community, particularly if you've written a case that is about a local business. Then we see many instances of that developing a link between the business around which the case has been written and the school. There may be internship opportunities that come for students with that business. There may be an opportunity for the business to come in from and participate in your classroom discussion if you're writing about a local business. Bringing in the participants, and now online makes it even easier to have someone join online, as I am now. Have them join the classroom discussion. That really has a great impact on developing and strengthening those relationships between your school and the business community. And that can have all kinds of benefits, both for the school and for the business itself. In fact, we see many businesses having a case written about them. They take the case themselves and use it as an induction tool to help support new recruits. Some use it as a recruitment tool, asking prospective candidates to give a view on the case. And others use it as a kind of reflective exercise for their own staff development, where they, in effect, teach the case to their own staff, asking them, if we were doing this, if we were faced with this scenario again, would we respond in the same way, or could we think of a better way of responding ourselves to the issue that we are portrayed as having responded to in the case? So that develops business relationships. It offers the case, many case writers see that it offers two things. One is an opportunity to perhaps do some consulting work, and the other is to develop a deeper understanding and a greater degree of trust with people in that business, so that you are invited back to write a further case which looks at the scenario more deeply, or which looks at a different aspect of the business more deeply, offering you an opportunity to write another case, which takes us back to the beginning of the cycle again. You do the research, you write it, teach it in the classroom, and so you then find that you have two cases. And I know of several directors of research who actually see this as a career development approach, which is highly effective. Instead of writing, let's say, a marketing case about one company or one sector and an organizational behavior case about a different one, they write those cases about the same company on the same industry, and they develop themselves and develop a standing as an expert on that business or on that sector. And it's a really interesting way of bootstrapping one's own development, both as a case writer and as an academic researcher. Next slide, please. Now, moving on, I want to look at some of the elements of cases that motivate case authors. I speak to a lot of case authors, and these things come through really time and time again. When I ask them, why have you written this case? The objectives are really shared among many, many authors. The first is that they are always stimulated, almost always stimulated, by a need to find something that they want to teach in their own classroom, and they can't quite find a textbook or another case that delivers exactly what it is that they're looking for. There's a missing something that they can't quite find in the work of other people. So their main motivation is to achieve learning outcomes in their own classrooms. And that means writing a case that combines both their own priorities as a teacher and their understanding of the needs of their students and the particular characteristics of the students in the cohort in that particular year. And what is current in terms of which companies are hot, what topics are hot, and what subjects are hot, what's really trending as feet on the ground business and management educators at the point when they're writing the case. It's a very quick way of writing something and getting it into the classroom, much quicker than waiting for a new edition of a textbook or waiting for or publishing a journal article and trying to find something from a peer reviewed journal. So it's a very quick way of getting essential outcomes into your classroom. And the context for that is very personal. The author's course or module at the author's school with the author's students. And the third element of those objectives is that case authors want to develop connections. They're inquisitive. They see, they may be speaking to someone and hear of a scenario. They may see it on the news. They may read it in the newspaper. But there's something about the scenario that they really want to explore more deeply. And it's got a twist to it that attracts their attention. And the people in it interested them. And they want to develop connections. So developing those connections and then using those connections in order to gain access to write the case is a prime motivation for many case authors. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that as well as the case itself, one of the prime elements in the case method is the teaching note. I want to say that I see that as an essential part, that I see it as a partnership between the case itself and the explanatory teaching note. And later when I share some characteristics of the most popular cases in the world, we'll see just how impactful having a good teaching note can be. Teaching note is used by some authors to guide their writing. So rather than writing a case and then adding a teaching note afterwards, they sketch out the teaching note first and use it as a kind of guiding star against which they do their writing. It's more and more obvious that faculty looking to select a case to teach in their own classroom prefer cases that have teaching notes. Many people choose the case not for itself, but because it has a really strong teaching note. And we can see the pattern of behavior of people coming to our website to look for a case is that many people search under the teaching note before they actually look at the case. That's because the teaching note gives them a really good insight into the motivation for writing the case, how best to teach it, and experience of what level it works best and what kind of students can work with it best. It summarizes the learning objectives in the case and provides a lesson plan. It talks about the student categories and the level at which it's being taught, and it shares the experience of the author in teaching their own case. So quite often the teaching note will include advice saying, at this part in the case, students typically provide this kind of response, so be prepared for it. It may lead you in this direction in the discussion, and if you want to counteract that and lead in a different way, then here's something that I find useful. So next, let's look at some current trends in case writing. Particularly, I have to say, in light of the experience of schools in responding to the pandemic. If we could move to the next slide, please. Yes, so the first of these is the development of online and hybrid classrooms. Let me explain what I mean. by online and hybrid. The impact of the pandemic has been to have students work away from the campus. And for many schools, that has shut down face-to-face teaching in a face-to-face classroom. There was, at the beginning of the pandemic, something of a worry and a concern that the case method couldn't work online, that actually it's not possible to teach a case in a discussion, especially in a large class group, online. I have to say that the experience of most case teachers during the pandemic is that yes, it is hard work, and yes, they have had to adjust their approach to teaching, but yes, the case method does work online, and you can teach cases online. And in fact, the experience has been that the case method has been more appropriate and works better online than a long, uninterrupted lecture. So the impact of the pandemic has been two things. One, it has shown that the case method and case discussions can take place very effectively online. And secondly, that online can mean several things. So it can mean synchronous sessions, which is the live session where everyone joins at once, and the case discussion and the case classroom takes place in a way that is closest to what we expect in a face-to-face classroom. A teacher leads the discussion and calls on the students to respond and to reach and work towards a conclusion. There are also asynchronous sessions, which are sessions that take place at a time of the students choosing rather than the teachers choosing. They are much less directed by the teacher or less intervention directly from the teacher. Students may work alone or jointly towards a deadline with an objective in mind that has been set by the teacher. Asynchronous sessions may also include a lot of the administrative information that you would typically share in the classroom. And that frees classroom time in the synchronous sessions to really concentrate on the live teaching of the case and the live discussion. And actually many case teachers have found that a real benefit, but because it means it actually gives them more time to spend in the teaching, and less of their time is taken up in providing administrative information. And then the third type of online environment is hybrid, which is a live session which has students in the classroom, but with the ability for other students to join online. And I've taken part in several sessions based on these hybrid lines, and I have to say it works really well. I've participated both as an online student and as a member of the live in the classroom set of students. And being in the classroom with people joining from outside, from a long way away online, I had thought that actually they would be more inhibited online. They would find themselves at a disadvantage. But actually my experience in the classroom was that I found I was looking at the screens all the time. I was following the teacher on the screen rather than looking at the teacher live in the space that we actually shared. So after 5 minutes acclimatization, actually the hybrid classroom becomes a very immersive, supportive experience and worked really well. It increases enormously the possibility for business schools in bringing students together from a distance, and combining both campus experience with online access for those who can't reach the campus. It does have an impact It has an impact, I think, on the type of case and the way that the case is structured. And I think it has an impact on the need for planning and resourcing faculty in working to develop cases and to teach using cases. And I think we can see the growth of multi-skilled teams that combine the abilities of both academics and technical and craftspeople engaged in educational design. If we could have the next slide, please. So one of the prime examples of this, that there is a movement towards shorter cases. They work better online because it's more difficult to read long sections of text online if you're sharing them. So the cases tend to be shorter. That's not to say the discussions are shorter, but the cases are shorter, and they're also chunked into shorter sections, especially if they're being used for asynchronous study. Those shorter sections allow for the case to be designed and written with other activities built into them, breakout rooms or self-assessment exercises that are both, some of them are formative and not marked. They're really for students to help assess their own understanding of material that they've been working on. And others are summative, so that they are assessed and do contribute towards the final result and grading for the course. But those materials are integrated and are structured in a way that make them really suitable for and effective in online environments. And that means that that faculty may start to work as in the context of being one of a number of members of a multi-skilled team, working together with educational designers who may give advice on when to break up the text, what kind of exercises to put into the text, to work with technical people who can talk about structuring the platform, and so on and so forth. And that has an impact not just on academic writers in writing the case, but also on the commitment of the school towards resourcing. That kind of activity needs proper planning and resourcing and has an impact on staff recruitment and on workload. Next slide, please. Online also has an impact on the teaching notes, so that if you want to write a case that can operate in the classroom face-to-face and also in the online classroom, then the teaching note has to address that. It has to include advice on how best to teach the case online in a hybrid context in a face-to-face classroom, and also can be used to highlight issues that can be addressed on the hoof. So that may include, it may be a case about, let's say, car making. And if you're interested in car making, then it has a conventional case approach and a conventional teaching note that looks at issues of, let's say, marketing. But if you're also interested in the case being used in a classroom that's teaching about inclusion and diversity, then the teaching note can be written to support that as well. Or if you're interested in it being taught in classrooms looking at environmental factors or the UN SDG targets, then the teaching note can be used to make the case adaptable and approachable for use in classrooms, concentrating on those issues as well. And the teaching note can also raise issues around metadata, how you describe the case in the teaching note, and the synopsis can also impact on how easily searchable it is for for other teachers trying to find a case that's suitable for their own classroom. Next slide, please. We've seen the growth of new formats as well. Comic strips have been developed and are very popular, coming out of ICFAI in India. Multimedia cases are being developed at many schools. So IE Business School in Madrid in Spain is very much a leader in that area, as is Imperial College in London. The business school there is very advanced in using multimedia, particularly online. And virtual reality, for something that is seems quite space age and very challenging for many schools, is remarkably commonplace in some schools. So Noema Business School in France, MIT Sloan School in the US, Stanford in the US, and INSEAD in France, Abu Dhabi and Singapore, all are developing cases making use of virtual reality, where students are able to wear a headset and walk around the location of the case to get a greater insight and sense of feel for the company setting. And there are some indicators as well of making multimedia more accessible to academics who are working without the benefit of that kind of well-resourced support coming from their business school. And there are now several platforms that are making it easier for individual academics to write cases and include multiple media elements within them. That's something I think will be gaining speed and traction in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. And here is a trend that I think is not going to stop, which is more authors are writing local. They're writing about businesses in their own locality, their own region, but thinking of a global impact, a global audience. And that comes about in two ways. One is that writing about local businesses strengthens the school's links with those businesses, and also with alumni, because quite often the link into the local business is through alumni of the school, and it maintains that really precious link and continuing relationship with alumni. It also supports student aspiration in terms of stretching student aspiration while also making it achievable. I want to expand on that a little bit. What I'm saying there comes from a conversation I've had with a case writer at a state college in the USA. And she spoke about writing cases and asking her students to be involved in writing those cases. But writing cases on local entrepreneurial businesses, coffee shops, restaurants and cafes, local startup companies, maybe in new tech. And her reason for doing that, well, she had several reasons for doing that. One was that she said the students in her class were very unlikely ever to be the chief executive of a global corporation. Their aspirations were to head to be successful in business at a more local or regional level. And by writing about local cases or cases about local success stories, she was able to stretch her students and develop their skills and nurture their aspirations in a context that was achievable. She said that when she taught with cases about big multinationals, actually many of her students were turned off because they just thought, I'm never going to be that person. Why should I engage with the case? Students like to read cases and discuss cases that feature people who are like them, with whom they can identify. And those cases actually travel surprisingly well. Cases that are written about regional businesses are often picked up and selected by schools at the other side of the world. And that's because many schools are international. They recruit students from all over the world, and they're looking for cases that are familiar, that have familiar brand names to those international students. It helps familiarize them with the case method process, and it gives them some status in the new classroom in a different country, because they are seen to have an insight and a knowledge as experts about a business they've heard of back home and which no one else in the classroom has heard of. So it gives those students confidence to speak in strange circumstances. So writing a local case but applying the lessons globally is definitely a trend that's growing. And another trend that's growing, if you could move the slide, please, is the topic of diversity, equality, and inclusion. The Center for Equity, Gender and Leadership at University of California, Berkeley, Haas Business School, EGAL for short, is doing a lot of work here identifying cases that have, for example, women protagonists, making it easier for people to search and find those cases. And they're putting together a project called the Case Compendium, which we're delighted to be working with them on, which makes it easier for those more diverse, friendly cases to be identified and taught in the classroom. So that's another growing theme, as is climate change and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Those are very hot topics at the moment, as is coping with the effects of COVID and the pandemic. Next slide, please. And having spoken about things that are popular, I want to end by looking at some characteristics of award and competition winning cases, and also our best-selling cases. So these are the results. This infographic looks at the results of our most recent awards and competitions, and I'll draw your attention to some things that I think you'd be interested in. First is the spread of the winning authors. 41 different authors from 18 schools in 10 countries. And how many of those were first-time winners? 73% of the winners were winning for the first time. So we can see that the case writing community is very dynamic and attracting new, highly skilled and effective case writers all the time. Look at the range of schools that are first-time winners and repeat winners are given there. You can see that many first-time winners are actually an excellent company when they join that list of winning schools. The featured companies are listed. I won't spend much time on those, but the winning cases, this is where I mentioned earlier the importance of a teaching note. 93% of those cases have a teaching note. And actually, we're not doing too badly on the gender of the protagonists. 31% of the protagonists are female. It's not enough, but it's a great step forward. We can see that the impact I spoke of earlier about taking the case out of your own classroom and it being distributed and taught in other schools, 89 were taught at 89 other schools in 29 different countries. So the impact and the spread through distribution is really quite significant. And the length of the case, 47% were between 11 and 20 pages. So almost half are in that range. Very interesting. And next slide, please. And here are the best-selling cases. There we can see that the most colleagues, this is our top 100 cases, featured 300 authors from 40 schools in 13 countries. The most featured author, I have to say, is dearly departed Deborah Patim Perkayasta, who died as a result of COVID. who is just a supreme case writer. Again, this is the data backs up what I said about the teaching note. 93% of the top selling cases have a teaching note. 34% of them have a translation. 15% have a video or a software element. And here we've got slightly different data about the publication date, for example. That's interesting because many students say that they don't like cases. Why are you teaching me something that's old? But here we can see of the best-selling cases, split pretty much equally between cases that are more recent, less than 5 years, cases that are up to 10 years old, and cases that are between 6 and 10 years old, or over 10 years old, I think. So there's a good mix there, almost a third, a third, a third. According to the age of the case. And 67% of those best-selling cases, 2/3 of them are between 6 and 20 pages long. And I'll leave it to you to go through, excuse me, I'll leave it to you at your leisure to go through the most popular industries. That you can guess what some of the popular industries, because students are enormously interested in and engaged with some industries more than others. Next slide, please, which is in conclusion. I would say to Renvoy, how wonderful it is to be invited to speak to you, to speak to a conference that is dedicated to the case method. The challenge, I think, for all of us engaged with the case method is to identify and nurture a methodology that is dynamic and embraces change. My view of the case method is it's a river with many tributaries. Each tributary brings something new, a different element that nourishes and grows the whole, and the whole laps against classrooms in schools all around the world, bringing impact and improved management education. So the answer to this challenge, how do we create a dynamic methodology, one that embraces change and grows in its variety and its impact, is you. And I'm so pleased that this week you've been able to converse about the case method, engage with the case method, and participate in the case method. Congratulations again on another very successful Renvoy. Congratulations on your research case competition. I look forward later on to hearing of the results, and I know that they're going to be announced very shortly. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and congratulations to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that lovely presentation. We're also delighted to have with us today Mr. Anand Chandramouli. So
may I just interrupt? Just let Ritika finish off this segment, just to thank you.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing with us your immense knowledge. We are certain every member present over here has gained tremendously. We request you to join us on 11th November 2021 for another wonderful session of the Mega International Lecture Series by Dr. Karen Cripps, University of Winchester, United Kingdom. Amity Business School will organize the 7th Global Leadership Research Conference on the theme Leading in the New Reality, Insights into Actions, which will be held on 16 to 18th February 2022. GLRC 2022 is a platform where management scholars, researchers, academicians, and practitioners come together to share their experiences about the groundbreaking outcomes of the research across diverse management domains, along with the subsequent contribution to the building of a theory in the field of management. We hope to see you all there. Now, I would like to request Ravisha to take over the proceedings.
Thank you,
Thank you
Richard.
so much. Right. So we're also delighted to have with us today Mr. Anand Chandramouli. Sir is the Director for Cognizant Research Center, part of Cognizant Technology Solutions, a global IT and business services company based in Teaneck. Sir focuses on building and offering research services to his clients and actively partners with stakeholders in developing fact-based thought leadership content. Prior to this, he was working for close to 4 years in the UBS India Service Center as a program manager in the COO office. Sir has a hands-on experience of incubating and scaling up research services, spanning financial, market, and strategic research. Sir has also spent 6 years with GE and IBM as Six Sigma Master Black Belt and Quality Leader. I request Professor Dr. Sanjeev Bansal, sir, to give the sapling to Mr. Anand Chandramouli, sir, as a token of our gratitude.
Mr. Anand, thank you so very much for being there. Welcome to Amity Business School. Thank you so very much. Looking forward to meet you in person also. Thank you.
One little thing I'd like to say here, Mr. Anand, we launched the ABS Center for Research Publications yesterday. Heartfelt gratitude to you for agreeing to come on board as an advisor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vandana. It's my privilege.
I now humbly request Chandramouli to kindly address the gathering.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So, I will take about 15-20 minutes of this time given. I will address this in 3 parts. 1, I'll set the basic premise as to why we need a very, very sustainable, to build sustainable competitive advantage, the need for a structured research process and methodology. So the why part, I will clearly lay out from a behavioral science perspective. So that's the first, the premise setting or the context setting part. The second part is from the very interesting and the fascinating field of behavioral sciences. I will cherry pick 2 key examples to show how our own human behavior or the fallacies really impede our progress at an individual level and then at an institutional level to advance the cause of our progress. So it's a very key, essential ingredient or a building block to build long-run sustainable competitive advantage. And the third and the concluding part would be the how part. How we in Cognizant drive the continuous improvement process, how we continuously study the markets, track events and developments through a very structured methodology to build our own sustainable competitive advantage. So you have this talk in 3 parts. So we can move on. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, here is my very favorite author. I'm sure many of you would have heard about Sherlock Holmes and read. This is a very famous statement made by Conan Doyle. So author Conan Doyle, what he says is, it's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. It's a very profound statement written about 120 years back, right? This is in the story, A Scandal in Bohemia. Next slide, please. And on the left side, you see the C.P. Scott is the editor, he was the founding editor of Manchester Guardian. Today, we all know this newspaper as the Guardian newspaper, one of the liberal sirens in the democratic world from the Western world. It's a London-based paper, very famous, is an activist newspaper. So on the right-hand side, I'm sure most of you would recognize is John Maynard Keynes. Right? What Sir Scott said, it is his founding motto. Even today, when you go to the insignia of the Guardian newspaper, you'll see this: comment is free, facts are sacred. And this is reportedly said, this is the quote attributed to John Maynard Keynes, when he said, when facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? Right? If you put these 3 statements together, what Conan Doyle said in the Bohemian story, and then what C.P. Scott said and Keynes has said, it may look like very intuitive, very easy, Yeah, that's how life is. That's how we are all. But we all know life isn't that easy. We aren't that rational as we are supposed to be. At least that's what the classical economics postulates it to be, right? We're not that. I'll dwell on why this is the case. While these statements together makes eminent sense, this isn't easy. This isn't the way we have evolved as human beings. Even about till 50 years back, we didn't have this understanding. Today, thanks to the evolution in the neurosciences and the systems biology, we can clearly see some of the startling facts as to how we have evolved has a huge bearing in how we think, how we process information, how our ability to pick signals from noise, how we react to adverse news or even to good news, right? So evolution has structured us in such a way that if you take as a continuum of millions of years of, say, human life or the evolution, we in our current form is hardly 20,000 years. So in a time scale of say 24 hours, we have been existing in this current form with this prefrontal cortex brain developed for about hardly, say, if you take the 24 hours in a day, hardly we have been in this state for less than 10 minutes in the evolutionary scale, right? So that tells you how human beings, as human beings, we've evolved right from the caveman stage to the modern setting, wherein we are able to commute to each other or talk to each other through this virtual setup. Are we really set up for that? Let's take the fascinating view from the neurosciences, right? Some of these postulates are fascinating. The first finding is this: our anatomy sets the limits for our behavior, right? What we feel and think depends on the neural network and the connections that we have developed over millennia, over thousands of years. These neural networks have evolved, and what we are today is shaped up by that. And genes control the brain chemistry, but they are turned on and off by the environment, right? So currently, the most evolved, the last Nobel Prize in the neuroscience, that study clearly shows that our brain continuously changes as a result of our experiences, right? Underline the word, our experience or a day-to-day experience has a very profound impact to change how our brain operates or how it gets, our neural networks internally gets wired and rewired. And these experiences produce physical changes in our brains, either through new neural connections or through the generations of new neurons. At times, if you just leave it to idle or to rust, it can also decay, right? So studies suggest that the brain can change even during the course of a day or a couple of hours, it can change. So that's how we are impacted by the external stimuli, right? Take this and see how real it is in the real world. You can test it out. So experiences are the reason that why all we individuals are unique, right? There are no individuals with exactly the same upbringing, either nutrition or education, social stamping, or the cultural setting. We're all unique in our own self. So this creates different convictions, habits, values, and character, right? So that's why people behave very, very differently, because the differences in their environment cause very different life experiences. That is why it is very, very hard for others to understand most of our people's behavior. Right? For example, you'll be at a loss to know why Anand reacted to a given scenario on the particular point in time. Right? So this is exactly the problem we in the business world face on a daily basis. It's not a very clinical lab setting that we live and work in. It's a very, very practical, real world filled with men and women driven by ambition, greed, right? You may whatever adjectives you want to throw it, you can throw it, right? We're all out there headbutting each other, and this is the environment in which business decisions are made day in and day out. This is as real as it can get. I'll sum it up. I'm going back to a very famous Roman emperor and philosopher. His name is Marcus Aurelius Antonius. And he said, our behavior is influenced by our state of mind. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Right? So when you enter the field of business, you will be able to appreciate what I just said. So these three statements, when you saw in these two slides, are a very, very distilled wisdom. And that wisdom is born out of from the school of hard knocks, as you would say. These are men who have seen life, who have been battered, and you've also tasted success in this life. And based on the sum total of that experience, these three pearls of wisdom were given here. Right? But behind that, there is a story of a millennia of evolution, or multiple millennia of evolution, which has conditioned and shaped us. So this is the premise. So to cut the long story short, we are not rational as we are supposed to be. We are as human as anyone is, right? So it is in this context we need to evaluate and reevaluate, assess and reassess ourselves, our decisions, and what goes into the making of those decisions. So that's the premise. More. Next slide. Okay. So how do we do this? I told you the business is very, very practical. It's a very dynamic field wherein millions of men and women on a daily basis headbutt each other, take decisions. So how do we approach? So this is the basic business research proposition. I have distilled it in 2 bullet points, right? Any research, any business decision needs to be underpinned, right? You need to enable these decisions through very, very logical reasoning, and that should be underpinned by facts, or for the want of a better term, data nowadays, right? And then based on this, underpin this, you should be in a position to articulate a very compelling point. That's where your salesmanship comes. Just having mere logical reasoning and just a bunch of facts isn't just enough. You need to create a lattice, a framework of all these things, put it into perspective, and have the ability to sell the sound proposition to the stakeholders, right? Who are in a position to take the business call, right? So this is what, in my experience, is the sum and substance of having a core business research. And that is the proposition any sound business research must advance. And it has to be underpinned. The right-hand side, you can see a very, very proven hypothesis-based research methodology. This is our experience. More. Next slide. Now I've set up the context, right? Now I'm going to play a small game. These are very, very, very popular psychological games. I'm a student of statistics, so I just picked 2 examples from the field of probability and Bayesian inference. I'm just giving you the clue right off the bat, right? Let's play the small game. I'll give you 2 scenarios and see how our behavioral science, how the people that we are, clearly it's at a conflict with what the classical economics postulated, which is human beings are rational. But whereas behavioral science shows that we aren't. I'll just show you how logically we think in these simple scenarios, right? Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Here's the first scenario for you. Linda is 31 years old. She's single, very outspoken, very, very bright lady. And to boot, she's majored in philosophy. So she has got all her intellectual chops more than required, I would say. So as a student, she was very deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice. And she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations, right? So this is the context. Now you have a fair picture, an image about who this lady Linda is all about. Now, here's a question to you. I'm giving you 2 options. A, she's a bank teller. B, she's a bank teller and is an activist in the feminist movement. Which of this alternative is more probable about Linda, right? If this question is given to you, how do you think people would respond? So in most cases, right? So this is the classical fallacy is called, this is the conjunction fallacy. I'm giving you the answer right away, right? Most of the people, whenever you give this question to mostly, even to math students, statisticians, somebody comes from the quant behavior, quant disciplines, the answer of the bat would be answer B, right? That Linda is a bank teller and she is a very, very active feminist. But that's not the answer. Why? That's where the conjunction fallacy comes in. Reason is it violates fundamental rules of probability theory. Right? If you notice, the option B contains option A. That option A is Linda is a bank teller. But option B also contains some more information that Linda is active in the feminist movement. So the problem is that a conjunction can never be more probable than either one of its conjuncts. Right? Suppose we say, let me just prove this, right? So suppose we say it's very probable that Linda is a bank teller, right? How boring it is. So let's give it a very low probability. We don't want to diss Linda, right? So we'll give it a low probability that say 0.4, less than 0.5, less than 50%. 0.4 that Linda is a bank teller. We don't want to diss her, as I told you earlier. Then what is the probability of her being an active in the feminist movement? Let's say that's very high. She's a philosophy major, she's very active, she has social concerns, demonstrated right from her student days. So in my view, so she should be, say, probability is very high. Let's say 90%, 0.9, right? However, the probability that she's both a bank teller and active and an activist in the feminist movement must be computed as the probability of the conjunction. These are not two independent events, right? Because Linda is the same person. So it is actually 40% chance that she's a bank teller and high chance, 90% that she's an activist in the feminist movement. So it's actually the product of these two probabilities. 40% multiplied by 90%, which is just 36%. So you started with the first probability that 40% chance that she's a bank teller, whereas this conjunction probability is lesser than that. So the answer to this is definitely not answer B, right? So she must be a bank teller. That's what probability tells us. So this is so counterintuitive, right? So this is how your judgments get clouded when I throw a lot of data in the garb of, say, I would say this is noise. When noise comes and hits you in the garb of information and data, your judgment, ability to see through, cut through the clutter and see the truth for what it is gets blurred. That's the first example. I'm going to up the game now. Let's go to the second example. Next slide. There's a very famous, I'm sure most of you would have heard about Daniel Kahneman. He used to be the university professor in Princeton, and he wrote a very famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So I just picked this example from this Daniel Kahneman problem. So imagine there is a cab which is involved in a hit and run accident in one night, right? There are two cab companies in the town. There is a green and the blue. They operate in the city. 85% of the cabs in the city are green and 15% are blue. There is one witness who identified that hit and run, that cab is blue, right? The court tested the reliability of the witness under circumstances based on the night, right? Because after all, it was night, could be many reasons, vision could be blurred, right? So they had to cross-examine the witness many times, give him tests to see how reliable that witness is. Then the court concluded that the witness correctly identified each one of the two colors 80% of the time. Very important, underline this. He identified each one of these two colors in the dark of the night 80% of the time, and he failed 20% of the time. So the success is 80%, failure is 20%. So now the question is, what is the probability that the cab involved in the accident was blue than green? When you give this problem to people, mostly the people will give you the answer is 80%. Why? That's what we call as the base rate fallacy. So this is the decision-making error in which the information about the rate of occurrence of something, right, is ignored, or it's not given the due weightage, the appropriate weightage that it deserves, right? So that's why you see, say for example, in this example, that the cab example I've given, there are two sources of information. And if you're a bit smart to see this, you will immediately pick, there is something called a Bayesian inference, right? You will combine the two sources of information by Bayes' rule. And then when you do that, the correct answer becomes 41.3 or 4%, right? Roughly about 41%. So that's the probability. So what the problem here is? they ignore. Typically, the people who give 80% as the answer, they ignore the base rate and they simply go with the witness. So, but that's why the most common answer here is 80% and not 41%. So this is how your ability to see and perceive what is happening right in front of you gets clouded. Now, I've given you these two examples. Right? Now, extrapolate these two mathematical problems. This is a very hypothetical scenario. So imagine you are sitting in the equity research desk in an investment bank or the sell side research, and every day there is news developments coming your way. Right? I don't know how many of you track markets very carefully. Today morning, if you see IRCTC, it's a very famous stock. Right? It is buffeted by a lot of actions, corporate actions initiated by the Ministry of Railways. So in a day, when you are in business, running a business, when you need to take a call, you are hit by a steady stream of information. Most of it is noise. So your ability to think through very logically and cut through this clutter, cut through this noise, and hone in on the vital few, the most essentials, is constantly under test. Right? So these are the two examples I'm giving it to you as to why decision making in fast, dynamic field like a business area, where too many people are involved, too many egos are involved, right? So in such a setting, it's very easy to get lost in all this noise. So the need for a very sound mental framework, the ability to think in very structured, logical terms becomes even more important. So that's what these two examples serve the purpose. Move on to the next slide. In my experience, what I have seen is there are 4 common biases. It's a very famous book on the psychology of misjudgments. So when you have time, I would recommend this group, especially the students and the faculty, to go through. There's a YouTube, there is a lecture by Charlie Munger. So he's the partner for Warren Buffett, and he's the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. So in fact, he addressed the students of Harvard Business School and the University of California. I think it's Berkeley. So you have those lectures in the psychology of misjudgments. There's a YouTube lecture available, and still better, there are 2 books I would recommend to this group. Right? I'm a big fan and a big proponent of the behavioral sciences. Right? So this is the book I would recommend. So the book's title is Poor Charlie's Almanac. Right? So this is edited by Peter D. Kaufman. Right? So it's one of those brilliant books written. It's a book. It's condensed wisdom of many, many decades of this great man who has been partner with Warren Buffett for the last 50 odd years, more than 50 years now. Right? So I picked 4 very common biases that I've seen and I've encountered, and I go through every day. Right? So first is, you can see, very cute picture, the self-deception and denial. Most of the times you've seen, we're not very happy with our status quo. We're not happy with our current state of affairs. So we would like to be in a state of denial and try to see the good things, the better things, which makes our egos feel better, which makes our things feel good about ourselves. It's very, very common. Each one of us in this call go through this, experience it every day. And extrapolate this into business context, right? I need to justify my performance, my team's performance, my business performance, my revenue, my profitability, my employee attrition, right? So I'm constantly questioned by the markets, by the analysts, by my bosses, by my stakeholders. So I need to constantly be not in a state of denial, obviously, but I need to portray or look at the brighter side of life, project the better, or rather the rosier pictures, right? So this is what we go through every day. And when under pressure, when you're pushed to the wall, most of them whittle and they get pushed into this corner of self-deception and denial. Inevitable. I've seen many, many, many cases. The next one is the consistency bias. I'll take one example and I'll tell you just in about a minute or so. The third one is our ability to deny and distort reality to feel more comfortable. Especially this is so, I've seen this, when the reality is so brutal that it threatens your self-interest. There's a very famous quote attributed to Upton Sinclair, right? Very famous American thinker and a philosopher. He says, he always used to say, it's very difficult to make a man change his views, right? Especially if his salary is dependent on him not changing that. Think about it. Very profound, right? If your means of survival, your livelihood is dependent on professing certain falsities or certain absurdities, you're forced to mouth and follow the same, despite knowing fully well that that's not the correct course of action, right? Many, many times we justify that to ourselves by denying and distorting reality. In business, you always see this. Move to the next slide. This is a very, very famous one. It's a confirmation bias, especially as researchers, as analysts, you will always see this. This is how it starts. I have a very pet theory, and so far I've invested myself in advancing that theory, and the world knows me, saying that, for example, I'll give you a simple example, right? Anand is a student of stock markets. He tracks markets and investing day in and day out. And the world knows me that Anand likes particular stock X or stock Y. He has invested his time, his brand equity, and his intellect in advancing that particular stock. He has recommended to many of his clients, to his friends. So now I'm invested in public. Now tomorrow, any inconvenient truth that comes my way or the company's way, which I promoted and sold to my clients, I will first, my reaction will be to brush it aside, right? Any inconvenient truth which is going to puncture the balloon of hypothesis that I've built to sell, to make that case, to sell it to my clients, to make money, I will just push it aside. And I will actively seek out evidences that support my hypothesis or my thesis. Even if it's a very reassuring lie, I wouldn't mind that. How often we see this? How often we encounter this? So if you sum up these 4 very popular human fallacies, the biases that we inflict on ourselves, you understand the picture, you understand the reality in which human beings operate. So it's very, very important that you are able to cut this noise out, have a very structured, a very clear thinking. You need an approach to it. You need a methodology to it, to clinically go through the data sets that you have, all the developments around you, all the news flow coming your way, to cut through the clutter, cut through the noise, and hone in on the vital few and get things rolling, so that you're able to take very, very optimal business calls backed by that sound research, which enables you to do it. Right? Go further. Next slide. This is a very classic example. I'm just going to give you 2 examples, but this is a very famous picture. I don't know, many of you, my young friends, especially the students, I think you're all too young to know this. This happened way back in 2003. I don't know how many of you have heard about this Iraq war, right? Post 9/11, when America under George Bush invaded Iraq, right? This is a very famous, and about 6 weeks into the war, right? George Bush got out of a naval ship. This is actually a US Navy naval warship with nuclear head, right? So he jumped onto the ship, and you can see right on top, there is an American flag, and on that you can see mission accomplished. So he went to war to avenge for the 9/11, and he made Saddam Hussein the enemy number 1. And the reasons the US administration under Bush gave was he had weapons of mass destruction, that Saddam Hussein is in cahoots with the ISIS, the terror organization, and 3, the people of Iraq are yearning for democracy and change. And as soon as the American soldiers land in Iraq, right, the people will come to the streets, and there'll be an uprising, and there'll be like a civil war, and they will overthrow the government, right? This is the kind of PR or the stories that was fed into the media. And this is the warmongering which happened. And with these causes, US invaded Iraq. In about 6 weeks' time, this man gets into this naval warship and announced to the world, saying that, you know what, mission accomplished. We've gone there, we have thrown this dictator, everything is hunky-dory, life is normal, the Iraqis are very, very happy with us. So we've gone there, we've done that. Hail America, right? We are the harbingers of peace, freedom, and democracy, right? That's the American pitch to the world. Now I've given you the slide. You can see the chart to the next on the right-hand side. From the time he made that statement till after 8 years, 8.5 years, till October 2011, for 8 long years, the American forces were bogged down in a bloody battle, insurgency, civil war, local uprising, tribal warfare, right? So the entire American apparatus was literally stuck in the Iraqi soil. So much for mission accomplished in 6 weeks. So that is the statement. So here is a president who had gone to the world and told his constituency, to his voter base, to the American public, general American public, who are Democrats also, but they are US citizens, right? He has publicly invested himself, right? He has told the world. So that's where the commitment and consistency bias comes in. So now, as the evidence to the contrary came back again and again, and what did our man do? He kept on defending it. That's where the commitment and consistency. He's now invested in that. He has no other choice but to defend it. So this is how, in reality, life will force your hands. It will bind you because you have taken a public stand. A lot is riding on you. You're invested. There's no way to step back. Stepping back is to be suicidal, right? So this is the reality in which you are operating. So quickly, in the interest of time, please keep moving. I'll tell you to the slide where we need to stop. We can skip this. You can just Google up and find for this for yourself. Yeah. So this is the reason why you need, as business leaders, a good structured research methodology to build sustainable competitive advantage. I'll take a minute to explain to you how we do it. Go to the next slide. So in Cognizant Research Center, our philosophy is we have a hypothesis-driven, fact-based, hypothesis-driven research approach. That's our chosen methodology. MEC, as we say, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, right? What does it mean? Study the market, right? Have a top-down view. I'm just going through these blurbs left to right. Study the country, drill down to the sector, drill down to the key clients in the particular sector, the key companies, understand your client and their competitive landscape, take their products and services at a local micro market level, benchmark it so that you know exactly who your clients are, what are their day-to-day challenges, who's their competition, how the industry sector is evolving, and what are their products and services, how is it stacking up vis-a-vis the top tier players, and how profitable they are. So this is our mantra, right? Every day, daily, week on week, week on week, we churn thousands of reports analyzing this. You should come in to see the machinery which drives this entire thing, right? It just doesn't happen like this. So there is a structured methodology. There is a framework which I have put in here, right? So that's what I talked about, a hypothesis-driven approach. So take any problem in 3 steps. Step 1, you need to frame the problem, study and scope it, then construct the hypothesis, test it based on the data, and be good enough, or rather be humble enough to reject those hypotheses, even if it's very inconvenient because of the previous stands you've taken, right? Just because it's inconvenient, don't throw the facts away, throw your hypothesis away, right? So it's very difficult to do, but that's what we do day in, day out. All our pet theories, pet invested projects will be cut out brutally out if the facts do not support it. Let me be very, very clear about it, right? So this is how we have structured. Still, do we make mistakes? Yes, we do make mistakes. It's a constant process. As I told you, it's a dynamic, business is dynamic. We're all human beings, as I told in the previous slides, how we are buffeted by our own inherent behavioral flaws, human fallacies, and psychology, misjudgments. We constantly do every day. Every day I make mistakes, right? So that's a learning process. So, but let's go to the last slide. But still, we need to have a robust research methodology. A process should be there to build long-run sustainable competitive advantage, right? 3 purposes research serves me over the last 15 years that I've seen. 1, It seeds out inherent biases and fallacies. Is it foolproof? 100%? No. But does it give me that narrows the funnel and helps me hone in and focus on the vital few? Yes. Does it enable very structured clinical thinking? Yes. Does it nudge me to multiple mental models of thinking and thought? Right? What do I mean by that term? There is a very famous Midwest American saying, a man with a hammer syndrome, it's called. If you have only a hammer for a tool, every problem will look like a nail to you. That's not good, right? So you need to have multiple tools in your toolkit to address the problem, right? What does it mean here? So there are insights from the fields of engineering, mathematics, statistics, probability theory, economics, say behavioral science, psychology, criminal psychology, law. So, right, the more you bring the multidisciplinary thinking to solve a problem, to frame it, to size it, to scope it, to study it, better you get. Right? These are the three distilled benefits that I've experienced, my team of analysts have experienced over these many years of doing this over and over again. Right? So on that note, that's how this entire research methodologies and the process has helped us, Cognizant, to build sustainable competitive advantage. So having said that, many, many thanks to this team Amity, Amity University in the Business School for giving me an opportunity to address you on this very auspicious occasion, I should say. You're running a conference, you've just launched a research center. So I wish Dr. Vandana, Dr. Bansal and the team all the very best. And we are on the cusp of Deepavali. So many, many hearty wishes and happy Deepavali to all of you and your near and dear ones and your families and friends. So may Lakshmi bring in all the health and prosperity and best wishes to Team Amity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for being with us today. Over to you, emceeing team.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining for the event. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Kritika Das Gupta, Senior General Manager and Head CRC, Amity Business School, to inform the audience about the further proceedings. Ma'am, you're not audible. Ma'am, not audible. Ma'am, not audible again.
Wait.
Sorry for the technical glitch. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me just increase the voice.
Sure, ma'am.
Renvoy 2021 was an international case study conference wherein more than 28 plus research scholars and academicians presented their case papers. The event was a huge success due to all the participants and the wisdom of the jury members. Team Renvoy is working on the compilation of the results and we will be soon announcing the same. Best of luck to all the participants and thank you all the speakers for the valedictory session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, we have reached the end of Renvoy 2021. I hope you all found the tracks insightful and relevant through the case studies presented by the authors. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the team to thank our Honorable Dean Professor Dr. Sanjeev Bansal sir for his consistent support and guidance. This event would not have been achieved without his constant support. We extend our sincere thanks to all the faculty members who have continuously guided us. I would also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all the extraordinary authors for joining us today and presenting such great work. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for gracing the event with their benign presence. With this, we come to the end of Renvoy 2021. Thank you everyone for joining us today and wishing you a very happy Deepavali in advance.